Welcome to our YouTube channel, where wisdom meets inspiration. In this channel, we share valuable insights to help you become the best version of yourself. Our content is designed to uplift your spirit and enrich your life. Make sure to subscribe to our channel to stay connected with this incredible journey. Click the subscribe button below.
The topic is bringing God home. The pujas that we do and the worship that we had earlier today, one of the ways, the characteristics of the worship that we have is there are clearly many forms of worship in different traditions and even within the Vedanta tradition as well. But one of the very endearing characteristic of the worship that we do is looking upon God, looking upon the divine as a guest. We know that we may have seen a lot of YouTube videos and had Zoom chats with people, and they kind of become somewhat real in our heads. But when we actually meet someone in person, then they become even more real. So personal, direct contact with people makes them very real. And one of the things that as spiritual seekers we can ask ourselves is when we say, I believe in God, I have faith in God, is how real God has become to me. We find the word God realization in the Gospel of Ramakrishna again and again and in Vedanta literature. What is the meaning of God realization? And clearly, there is many different ways we can express that. But the way that I like personally very much is God realization is making God real. And we might discover that in our own heads, God is often a concept, an idea, something that we believe in, something that we hope is someone who is there. But unless and until we have had a direct experience of God, somehow that reality doesn't sink in. And so God realization would be a way to make God real. And the worship that we do when we invite God into our homes as a guest is a ritualistic way of making the presence of God very real in our lives. And so a lot of the things that we do, and because this is a very ancient tradition, the way the guests were invited may not exactly tally with the way we do today. But for instance, in the elaborate forms of worship, the first thing that they do is cleaning and purification of the area where the worship is being done. And sometimes when we are expecting a VIP guest, we do clean our homes and clean everything and make sure that everything kind of looks good and neat and tidy. And then in the ritualistic worship, among the things that are offered, there is the seat is offered, and then one of the first things they do is offer water for washing the feet. Now, clearly, if a visitor has come from very far away, and think about in ancient times, and then one of the first things they did was offer water for washing feet. And then you invite the guest in, you make them feel comfortable, give them flowers, and the way it's done ritually is you then feed them, give them fruit and food, and a way of honoring them is through waving of lights and so on. So the idea is we are not merely remembering God, not merely thinking about God, but actually feeling the presence of God right in front of us. Because we see that we need faith, we need belief, only as long as we have not had a direct experience. Now, when I look at this chair in front of me, I don't have to say, I have faith that the chair is there. I believe there is a chair. I don't have to say that, because I just see the chair directly. But we still have to say, I have faith in God, I believe in God, because we haven't had a direct experience of God yet, at least not me. I don't know if some amongst you may have had so. So that was in my mind when I thought of the title, Bringing God Home. And since you're going to celebrate here next weekend the birthday of Krishna, what I would like to do is share with you a story concerning Krishna, but which will highlight the significance of bringing God home. So this story is connected with a Krishna temple in northern India. It's a well-known temple there. It's in a place called Vrindavan, associated with many childhood incidents from Krishna's life. And that temple is called the Banke Bihari temple. It was a temple, Sri Ramakrishna has visited the temple, and it's very well known and one of the tourist attraction, even if people who go there just out of curiosity when they visit these ancient temples. And of course, the devotees of Krishna simply adore and love that place. But that temple is a little bit different from other temples. Now, most temples, if you go and then on the altar there is the deity, and then you bow and respect and pray to the deity. There is an altar there in that temple as well, and there is Krishna on that altar. But the unusual thing in that temple is that separating the altar and the devotees, the congregation in the prayer hall, is a curtain. And that curtain is opened and closed throughout the day. As soon as the temple opens, they open the curtain, and in about a minute or a minute and a half, they just close it again. And then they open it again, and they close it again. And it just goes throughout the day like that. And that's pretty unusual. You don't see that in many other temples. And so, obviously, the question would be, why do they do that? What is the significance of these closing and opening of the curtains? And as with many ancient temples in India, every temple has a story to tell of why certain things happened the way they are being done now. And so the story here is very interesting. Apparently, the temple, when it was started sometime in the 15th or 16th century, it was just like other temples. There was nothing unusual about it. And quickly, it became very well known, partly because if any of you have been there, you might have seen it yourself. But nowadays, you don't even need to go there. Just go to Google and just put the name of the temple, and you'll have hundreds of images, hundreds of pictures of that temple. So we can even visit that virtually. So the image there was, sometimes they use the word Swayambhu. It wasn't carved or sculpted by anyone. It was found. It was found in the underground by a great saint named Haridas. And he was actually his student became even more famous in history, and that was Tansen, the great musician, the great singer. So his guru, Haridas, was a great saint, and he had found that image and was worshipping it himself. And later, after his passing, that image was put in that temple. And so because of that deity was considered an awakened deity. In other words, if people pray there, the prayers are answered very quickly. And so very quickly, a large number of pilgrims started visiting that temple. Now, as it happens, and some of you may have known about this, in many of these very popular temples which attract lots of crowds, there were a lot of shops outside selling flowers and garlands, because then the pilgrims could buy them and make an offering inside the temple. So among the people selling garlands and flowers was one little girl. She was probably at that time 9 or 10 years old. She was an orphan, She lived by herself. And the only way, her father used to sell garlands, and then when they passed on, that was the only thing she knew. So she started selling garlands. She used to make beautiful garlands. And the temple authorities, the priests there, they needed 10 garlands every day for their worship. For the different rituals they did, they needed 10 garlands. And so they had given a contract to this girl to supply the temple with 10 garlands. And she would do, and of course she would sell garlands and flowers to others as well. And she earned enough to maintain herself. Now this little girl was also a great devotee of Krishna. Now she had a great desire to go and garland the deity herself. Now, as with many temples, not everyone had a direct access to the altar and to the deity. And so usually, fortunately or unfortunately, there's always somebody as a gatekeeper. And so when the pilgrims brought things for offering, they had to give them in the hands of the priest. And the priest was the one who actually went and did that offering. If they brought garlands, they gave it to the priest. The priest is the one who went and put the garland. But this little girl, she hoped, she said, why can't I do it myself? I love Krishna. And it's the great desire of my heart to go and garland Krishna myself. But of course, system, it just doesn't work that way. So she thought, but she did one thing. What she did was, she was being paid for 10 garlands every day. So she said, I'm going to give them 11 garlands every day. They can charge me for 10, but I'm going to give an extra garland every day as my offering. And her hope was that one day these priests will look at the number of garlands and say, we only order for 10. Why is she sending 11? And if they question me, then I'll tell them, that's my own personal offering. I'm not expecting to be paid for that 11 garland. And when they might see how devoted I am to Krishna, then they might say, would you like to come and garland him yourself? And so that was her hope. And so she went on supplying this extra garland every day, day after day after day after day. But priests, as oftentimes priests can be, they didn't even notice that extra garland. And so this girl kept on hoping that one day I might get a call, but it never happened. So after doing this for weeks and months, then one day she was so overwhelmed with grief and this feeling that probably I'll never get a chance to go and garland Krishna myself. And so she went inside the prayer hall and stood in one corner and then started praying to Krishna. And from the anguish of her heart, she prayed to Krishna and said, I've been giving this extra garland. You know how much I love you. You know how much I want to go and garland you myself. Sure, these priests haven't noticed it, but they're just human beings, and human beings are fallible. But you know everything. So why can't you do something about it? And because she prayed so earnestly, it came from her heart. Suddenly she heard a voice, the voice of Krishna. And Krishna said, of course I know you have been sending this extra garland. I've been noticing it. I am completely aware of it. And then she said, if you're aware of it, why don't you do something about it? And then he said, that's the problem. I'm not as free as you think I am. Because he said, it's the priests who decide when I should get up in the morning. The priests who decide when I will eat, how much I will eat. They decide when I should go to sleep. I don't have any freedom. And this girl is like, that's nonsense. I mean, you're supposed to be the creator of the whole universe. You run the whole place. And you don't have freedom. And he said, that's the reality behind it. But then she said, then what's the point? Can't you do anything? And he said, okay, I have a plan. Why don't you come in the evening, late in the evening, after the temple is closed? Then the priests have gone home, no one's around here, and then you can do whatever you want. You have full freedom. And that time I'm also free because there's no gatekeepers here that time. And then she said, but the temple will be locked. And then Krishna said, oh, don't worry about that. I'll take care of it. You come in the evening after the temple is closed, and then you can do whatever you want. And so this girl was so happy, so excited. And so she goes home, she gets a nice basket, prepares a garland with fresh flowers and roses, and she cooks some dishes for him, everything that we would do for worship. And then night, after everything is dark, the temple is closed, she gets one lantern in her hand. And those are pre-electricity days, and it was very dark, so she got a lantern, and then in the second hand she held a basket, and then she came to the temple. And then, as soon as she touched the door swung open. And she goes inside. And then the door to the sanctum also opened. So she went still inside. And she was so happy, so excited. She said, she felt like dancing immediately. And she said, now I can do whatever I want, and thank you so much. And so on. But then Krishna said, wait a minute, don't get so excited so quickly. He said, the problem now is, this temple is supposed to be closed. And of course, the only light you have in your hand, a lantern, if you switch it off, we can't see anything. But if it's lighted, people in the village, Vrindavan was still, it's no longer as small a village as it seems now, but that time it was still a very small village. And so he said, people in the village will see there is light in the temple, they might think some thieves have come, so it's not safe to do it here, though your worship and everything. Better, let us go to your place, your home. So she had this kind of one small little cottage just towards the edge, almost the end where the village boundary ends. And he said, let's go to your place, and then no one will disturb us. She said, okay. And he said, you lead the way, I'll follow you. And so then this girl picked up a lantern, picked up her puja stuff. She started walking, and Krishna went behind her. Then once they reached the girl's home, she opened the door, they went inside. He said, close the door, close all the windows, make sure everything is latched. And then he sat on her bed and he said, okay, now you're free to worship and do whatever you want. But then as she was about to begin, Krishna remembered something else. He said, okay, just a minute. He said, the morning temple, it opens at 6 o'clock. I have to be back before that time. Because in the morning when the priests come and open and they find I'm missing, then there's going to be a problem. So keep an eye on the clock. Because he said, when I'm with devotees, I completely forget, I lose the sense of time. So I may forget. So and then she said, but I'm so happy that you are at home. I will forget too. And then they said, okay, they promised each other, okay, we both will try to be mindful of the time. And then she washed his feet, and the way we do puja, the way we do worship, but she had the opportunity to not do the worship of Krishna in an image or in a photograph, but Krishna himself was right in front of her. So she did, with her heart's content, she did the puja, she garlanded him, her lifelong ambition was finally fulfilled, and then she fed him with the delicious sweets that she had prepared, and then she sang and they danced together. It was wonderful. And time passed, and they both forgot to look at the clock. Suddenly, they heard this loud knocking on the door. Open the door, open the door. And then they looked at the clock. It was like 6:30 in the morning. And then clearly it was the priests had come. And apparently it was the rainy season, so the ground was wet, and they had noticed these footprints going out of the door, and that's how they were able to trace where Krishna might have been taken. And so that's how they landed at that girl's cottage. So as soon as they heard the knocking, Krishna said, "Go open the door." And she was afraid. I mean, she's just 10-year-old little girl. She said, no, you open the door. And Krishna said, "It's your house. It's not your." And this little girl had to go and open the door. As soon as she opened the door, these 3 or 4 big, tall, burly priests that barged in. "Where is the image? Where is Krishna's image?" By that time, Krishna's image is just kind of lying on the bed there. And they found the image. Said, "Here, this girl stole the image from the temple and brought it here." And this girl is like, "No, I didn't steal him. He himself came. He just followed me. He first said, he asked me to come in the evening. I went in the evening." And they are like, yeah. The priest said, "I have been doing worship here for last 30 years. He has not so much as blinked at me. And you think you want me to believe that he talked with you, he walked with you?" And before me, my father worshipped here. Before that, my grandfather. Nobody has ever heard Krishna's voice or move or anything. And now you wanted to believe this story? And the little girl kept on saying, "No, please believe me. This is what happened." And anyway, they couldn't argue with her a lot because the time was getting on, and there would be a big scandal if the villagers came to know that the image was missing. So the head priest, he told his assistants, "Now, I will take care of the rest. You take this image, go quickly. So far, nobody in the village knows about this. You go, install the image, do your morning worship, and let's pretend things were as normal as before. Nobody need to know about this." And then after these priests had taken the image there, and then this head priest looked at this little girl. Now this head priest was a sensible man. He quickly realized that the image was just too heavy for this little girl to carry. So although he found it incredible that Krishna went, he said, "Well, it's possible, but this little girl couldn't have done it." And so he believed that yes, it's possible that Krishna did come here on his own. But he then threatened that little girl. He said, "I want you now to leave this village and go away from this place completely. No, we don't want to hear from you again. If you stay around here, we are going to call the cops and you will be punished." So, and poor little girl, she got so frightened, she left the place immediately with her little belongings, and no one ever heard of her again. Maybe she just became an enlightened being. We don't know what happened to her afterwards. Now these priests, they came, they installed the image back, the worship continued, the people came. Nobody other than these priests knew what had happened. Now that afternoon, the priests and all the assistants, they had a meeting. And the head priest told these others, however incredible the story looks, I tend to believe what that girl was saying. I do believe that out of compassion, Krishna's heart melted, and he saw the devotee truly loving him, that pure, transparent devotion. And then Krishna went to her place. Now their problem was, okay, this girl was praying sincerely and Krishna went to a place, and now of course we have taken care of that. She no longer will come to pray there. What if some other devotee comes and prays with equal ardor, and Krishna's heart again melts and again he goes away? And now luckily, this time this little girl kind of stayed not too far away. We were able to quickly go and bring the image back. What if, let's say, next time a devotee comes from Sacramento or something, where will they come across the ocean to get the image back? And so we have to do something about it. And so that was the time they got this brilliant brainwave. They said, let's put this curtain in the middle. And so you close the curtain, Krishna is not able to see anybody. And then a large throng of devotees gather there waiting for the curtain to be opened. And then after 2 minutes, they open the curtain. And all that Krishna sees is a large number of devotees. And everyone is praying intensely. And as soon as Krishna tries to zero in on some particular person, they just close the curtain again. So the idea was to prevent Krishna from running away, not answering the prayers. Now, and there's a lot that can be said about this story. It's a beautiful story. But then we might say, besides being an interesting story, does it have any message for us? What do we learn from this story? And one thing, as I said, that's how I began by speaking about worship. Because that's when we invite whoever is the object of our worship, whichever deity we worship, whichever form of the divine that we worship, can we bring that divine in that form in our home? When we meditate, when we pray, we try to, this is our home. I mean, there is an external home is where we stay. The internal home is our own heart. Sri Ramakrishna often said that, well, God is everywhere, but the presence of God can be felt more clearly, more tangibly in our own heart. And that's why when we try to meditate, we try to, why do we close our eyes? Why do we, one of the ways this can be expressed, and in often Vedanta texts they do it that way, is our senses naturally go outward. There is a beautiful passage in the Kathopanishad which expresses this idea. It goes like this: Paranch kahani vyatrinat swayambhuhu tasmat parang pashyati nantaratman kaschid dhiraha pratyakatmanamaikshat avritta chakshuhu amritatvam icchan. It's one of the often quoted passages from the Upanishad. And what it means is simply this, that our senses, the sense of sight, sound, all the way we are in contact with the world, all of our senses are projected as going outward. And that's why, in order to see something, we don't have to really make too much effort. Just open your eyes, and then whatever is in front automatically shows up. All the sounds around us, if our ears are in working condition, we just hear them. So the senses are so experts in gathering sensory data from the external world. And that's how we know what's happening around us. The senses are not that great in telling us what's going on inside us, because all of the consciousness is kind of going outward. And if the truth is within, if God is within, then of course I don't see anything, because all of my senses are taking me outside. And that's why when we meditate, we try to shut the senses as much as we can. And therefore it's easier to meditate with eyes closed, because when I close my eyes, I'm shutting out the visuals as much as I can. It's shutting down the mind is much more difficult, but let's begin with trying to do what we can. So we close our eyes. We try as much as possible to sit in a quiet place. Or nowadays you don't have to do that if you have some good noise cancelling headphones. It's also helpful not to be eating or munching something when you are meditating, so the sense of taste remains relatively inactive. So also, for instance, while meditation, sometimes they say not to wear too tight clothing, because then your sense of touch can become active again. So some loose clothing where the idea is to kind of calm down the senses as much as we can. And of course, as I said, calming down the mind is a much more tougher task. But the idea is, the more I try to shut down the doors which take me out into the external world, the better chance I have of looking within. It's almost like taking a U-turn. All these consciousness is going out, I make it turn inside. That's the third line in that verse. Avritta chakshuhu. The senses are closed and this is made to turn upon itself. Sri Ramakrishna gives the example, and we can put it in modern terminology today. If in an extremely dark night with no lights around, if all that I have is my flashlight in my hand, then with the help of my flashlight, I can see the road ahead of me. But if someone is coming from the other side, my light can help them see the road as well, but they can't see my face because I'm behind the flashlight. So if they have to see me, if they want to know who I am, they'll have to say, could you please turn the light towards yourself so that I can see your face? That's our situation. Because when we try to see God in our heart, we close our eyes, we do all that it's possible for us, and yet beginning, all that we see is darkness. We see the darkness because somehow the light is still projected outside. We need to wait to turn the light back towards ourselves. Now, very briefly, just a few things that need to be said about the practice of meditation itself. There are many different ways of expressing this idea, but one way is to distinguish between the practice of meditation and thinking. So thinking about God and meditating on God, are they one and the same? Oftentimes when we say, I'm now going to do meditation, what are we really doing? And I think for many of us, we are really thinking about God at that time. But is thinking itself meditation? So one of the ways this idea gets expressed is through the visual of an ocean, for instance. So we know that even in the yoga sutras, the mind is often pictured as a lake. And we know that in a large bodies of water, the surface is always much more disturbed. You have waves and you have ripples, and it's much disturbed. But deep sea diving, those who have done, you know that as you go deeper and deeper inside the ocean, the water becomes more and more still. If you go down at the bottom of the Pacific or the Atlantic, it'll be almost like a glass case. There's no movement there. All the movement is on top. Something similar happens in our own mind as well. It's on the surface level of the mind, there is all this disturbance going on. But the deeper we dive within, the mind becomes still, calm. And that's why there is this one Bengali song that Sri Ramakrishna used to sing often, that dive deep within my mind. And so, the example that comes to my mind is of sleep, for instance. Sometimes we say, I'm going to sleep now. You're tired, you had your dinner, and then you say, I'm going to sleep. We make it appear as if sleep is something that we can do. It's in our own hands. It's in our own capacity to do. Actually, no. We cannot will ourselves into sleep. So when we say, I'm now going to sleep, what we are actually going to do is what most of us do. We go to our room, make sure our bed and everything is comfortable, switch off the light, and then lie and just wait. There's nothing you can do beyond that. And then at some point, sleep happens. So sleep is not something that can be done. Sleep is something that happens. All that I can do is make the conditions as favorable as possible for sleep to happen. In exactly the same way, meditation is something that happens. Meditation is not thinking about God. Meditation is actually seeing God. And that's what brings me back to what I said before. It's like if my friend is far away, let's say if my friend is staying in New York, and then, of course, nowadays you can still do video chat and all of that. But other than that, I can think about my friend because my friend is far away. But let's say if my friend is visiting me and we are sitting across table sharing a cup of tea or coffee, I don't say, let's close our eyes and think about each other. We don't do that because the friend is right in front of me. Why should I think about my friend? I can just see my friend. And so when we say that God is everywhere, and isn't that a paradoxical thing? If God is everywhere and we see God nowhere, how come someone who is everywhere can't be seen anywhere? If I truly believe that God is in my heart, God is right here, then why do I have to think about God? Why can't I see God? And therefore, there is a difference between thinking and seeing. So when we close our eyes, try to turn our attention to the heart, and yet don't see God. Or don't see God in whichever form. In our Ishta, your chosen ideal, chosen deity, you don't see the divine in that form. Then the next best thing we can do is to think about God. Now, thinking has this great power, so to speak, that when my thinking becomes one-pointed, with no distraction of any kind, then at some point thinking stops on its own and seeing begins. Just like when we are going to sleep, we switch off the lights, we lie down, maybe turn or twist a little bit here and there, and then at some point, sleep happens. Exactly in the same way, we close our eyes. If we see God right away, then you are blessed. If you don't, then think about God. Think about God so intensely. And that's why oftentimes in many kinds of meditation, what helps is a visual. What helps is a sound. So since we deal with forms all the time, that's what we are trained to do. That's what the mind and the eyes and senses do. All that we say is, instead of saying, get rid of all forms, get rid of all things, it's easy to say. It's very difficult to put it into practice. And so what we can train our mind to do is, instead of flitting from one form to another, for the next few minutes, just hold on to one form, the form of your chosen ideal. Instead of getting distracted by hundreds of different sounds, just hold on to the one sound, the sound of your mantra. And so that's one way of calming the mind down, that you are asking the mind to hold on to just one form and one sound. And that already, to the extent the mind succeeds in doing so, it already calms down quite a lot. Now this form and this sound that we have given the mind, because it is so powerful, because it is a divine origin, just like in sleep, with turning and twisting ends and suddenly sleep starts, in the same way, this is still a thinking process. When you're holding on to a form, holding on to a sound, in Sanskrit they say it's a manasa vyapara. It's still an activity of the mind. But at some point, because of the power embedded in the form and the sound, thinking stops on its own. And it stops on its own, and then seeing begins. When exactly it happens, how exactly it happens, no one can say for sure. What we do know, it does happen. And that's when the divine in our heart is no longer someone to be believed in, no longer someone in which we need to have faith, but someone who is very real. Now, what is the how real is the divine in our heart? Are there gradations in reality? And probably, yes, that might be the way our human mind thinks. When we see dreams at night, as long as we are seeing them, they seem very real. But then when we wake up, they say, oh, now this is the real. And that's just a dream. So in our way of thinking, we do ascribe a higher, greater reality to this world that we are than the reality that we saw in our dream last night. So just as this waking world seems more real than the dream world, the real that I see in my heart is even more real than this waking world. Compared to the reality of the divine that we see in our heart, compared to that, even this world appears less real, is almost like a dream. Now, many devotees who have done their practice in the way that their teachers have taught them, done that with faith, with regularity, with devotion, day after day, without getting discouraged, sometime or the other, they have had that experience. They have seen the divine in their heart. And even if any amongst us have not seen that, we have hope that yes, if someone has seen, then I can see it too. Because that was one of the great teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. He didn't say, I have seen, when Narendranath, as Vivekananda, young Vivekananda went and asked him, have you seen God? Ramakrishna didn't say, yes, I've seen God, now you just keep on worshipping me. He didn't say that. What he said was, yes, I've seen God, you can see him too. And that's not something he told only Narendranath. That's something that Ramakrishna is telling every one of us. Every one of us has that potential, has that capacity right now, right at this moment, to experience the presence of God in our heart. All that we need to do is to just follow the instructions of whatever guide or teacher we have had in our life. Now, those who have had this experience find that the experience itself doesn't last too long. Yes, it's very profound. It's a game changer. It can change our life. It can transform our life. But the experience itself is often short-lived. So you see God in the heart, and then afterwards, something happens and it's almost like the curtain gets closed. Sri Ramakrishna gives another example. When you have a pool with stagnant water, and sometimes this moss and algae will cover that thing. And then you just kind of move it a little bit, and then below you see clear, transparent water underneath. But then you just stand by, after some time, all that algae and this thing come and cover it up again. Now that's what happens in our lives also. Even when we are lucky and fortunate and recipient of that grace of God in the form of this direct experience of the divine in our heart, then after that experience ends, because of our all past accumulated desires and ambitions, and still the heart not having been completely transparent yet, somehow it just comes and covers that, as if this curtain has closed again. So that's how we relate to the story of Krishna that I mentioned before. There is already this opening of the closing of the curtain happening in our lives. So the first time the curtain opens in our heart, it's an amazing experience. But when the curtain closes, and just because when you have had this first taste of it, it can be even more frustrating in some ways because you want it to open again. It's a little bit like, for instance, just to give an example, it's no longer true, but before I came to this country, I had never tasted tiramisu. I didn't know about it in India. And so the first time I came, and somebody brought it a dessert, and it was so delicious. And I said, what is this? What is it called? They said, oh, this is tiramisu. I said, oh, this is great. Now, before I had never eaten it, I never missed it, because I didn't even know it existed. But now, after eating the first time, then I said, oh, when will that next time I have the same tiramisu for dessert? Now that's what happens. When the first time the curtain opens, the first time you are able to see, not just feel, but see the divine in your heart, and then the curtain closes again, it's like, when will it open again? And that's a good thing. That kind of a frustration is so much better than frustration related to things, the perishable things of the world. Swami Brahmananda, in that book, The Eternal Companion, in fact encourages, he says, cultivate divine discontent. So often the people say, be contented, be happy. Okay, be happy, then you don't need to do anything. So yes, be happy with things over which you have no control. But this is something, we have to be extremely unhappy that we haven't yet realized God. We see that in the life of Ramakrishna himself, that he was so, in the beginning, so intensely looking for the vision to see whether the Divine Mother he was worshipping, was she real? He wanted to see her. He would rub his face in the ground. It was like, maybe you don't have to do that. But we see how extreme his case was. At the end of the day, he would say, one more day has passed and I have not had a vision of the Mother. And so that intensity, finally, when he had that vision. We see that in the case of Swami Vivekananda as well. When he had this first experience of Nirvikalpa Samadhi through the grace of his Guru in Kashipur in 1886. And then, of course, it was a profound experience, as one can imagine. But when it ended, he was restless. He wanted it to continue. He didn't want it to end. And then Ramakrishna said, okay, I'm not locking it up because you have a lot of work to do. And you can imagine it must have been even so much more frustrating for him. He tried throughout the short life that still remained for him to work and move amongst us to get that experience again. And we do have some 3 or 4 at least recorded instances when through the grace of Ramakrishna, he had glimpses of that again. The curtain did open for him again. Until at last, finally, in 1902, July 4th, the curtain opened once and for all. So that's what even you and I, when we continue with our spiritual practices, we will see a similar phenomenon occurring within our own hearts. We'll see the curtain, the first time it opens, it'll be wonderful. Keep on, and then we will see, if I do that, maybe after a few days, maybe a few weeks, could be months. We just have to be patient. Then the curtain will open again. The more often the curtain opens, my faith will deepen, my intensity of practice will increase, and over time, what we will see is that the gaps between the opening of the curtain will become less and less and less. And once the curtain is open, it will remain open for a longer time. And then, who are these enlightened beings? Who are those spiritually illumined ones? They are the ones in whose heart the curtain has gone completely. It never closes. So that's the struggle going forward. Not simply to think of God, not simply to believe in God, but the goal is to see God. That's why in the teachings of Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, Swamiji, we see that religion is not simply about believing in things, not simply acknowledging things, but actually experiencing. That's why they said religion is realization. And I don't know how etymologically right or appropriate it is, but realization, whenever I heard the word realization, I think making it real. Only when I see God, God will become real to me. And when God becomes real, so when you enter the shrine, when you come here, you're then no longer standing before the image or a photograph or this thing. You're standing in the presence. So it's not simply a picture of Ramakrishna, a picture of Holy Mother. They are there in reality. So that's what I mean by just as when we meet our friends, we see the friend standing in front of me is real. That's the kind of realization we need when we go inside a temple that before me on the altar is real, God who is real. Because oftentimes we think that when I go to a temple, I will have darshan. I'm going to see the deity on the altar. What many of us don't think or don't remember, that just as I am seeing the divine, God is seeing me too. So it's not simply I'm having darshan, God is having my darshan, if we don't like to think about it that way. But it's good to remember. People speak about the big brother watching. Nobody wants the government to be watching and intruding into your privacy. But think about the divine who is watching us all the time. It might be uncomfortable to know that God is watching me all the time. But, and this is important, remembering that I'm never really alone, that nobody in the world might know or see me if I'm just closed in my own room, but God is already there. And remembering that God is always watching me, God is always seeing me, God is always hearing me, we will make fewer mistakes in life. We will make better choices in life if we remember that we are always in the presence of God. And if we continue in this way, a day will come when the curtains will open for the first time. The curtain will keep on opening with greater frequency, and one day the curtain will open and never close again. Then we can say, truly, God will have come to our home. And we are going to then keep him there and not let him go anywhere. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagatgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhur.
Become Swami Vivekananda's messenger. Share the video with 3 of your friends.